So next slide. Also, I wanted to offer a few ground rules just to help keep us on track this evening. As I mentioned, this is our second public meeting on the clean truck strategy. The content for this meeting is very similar to what we covered during the first meeting. We're just, again, offering it a different time of the day. We had excellent comments during the first session, and the goal for today is really to try to hear from those who were unable to attend the first meeting and bring as many new voices into the discussion as we can. So if you've already given a public comment, we'd ask that you allow time for new people to speak first. When you do speak, please keep your comments brief and to the point so that we can allow as many people to speak as possible. And we would also encourage that everyone on the call treats one another with respect and that we avoid using any harsh language or personal attacks. There are certainly a lot of complexities to this topic. We're going to hear a range of opinions. Let's recognize that we're all human here and we need to do our best to work together so that we can tackle these challenges together and not as adversaries. So thank you in advance for your cooperation. The agenda for tonight, we have a brief presentation on the clean truck strategy to start things off. And then we're going to move into public comments where each speaker will have 2 minutes. And then we'll conclude with a question and answer session with the leadership team from CDOT, CDPHE, and the Energy Office. So shifting into the actual content of the meeting, the Colorado Clean Trucking Strategy, why are we holding these public meetings? Why is your participation so important to us? First, we know that truck technology is changing. And we recognize that these new technologies offer benefits that we need to consider for our future. Zero emission truck technology is cleaner. That has benefits for the air that we breathe. And it has benefits for lessening the impact that these vehicles have on our environment and on our climate, both locally and globally. Vehicles using this technology are also much quieter, which can lead to quieter, healthier neighborhoods, especially for our fellow Coloradans who live near these freight corridors. The technology is more efficient, which impacts the bottom line, both for our businesses and for our consumers. And the fuel is also less expensive, not subject to the huge price swings like gasoline and diesel tend to have. And the vehicles themselves have fewer moving parts, which result in lower maintenance costs. So there are some, big advantages that we need to be considering. And also, in many cases, the energy used to fuel these vehicles is produced locally, which enhances the energy security of us as a state. We also know that the trucking industry is very diverse, and Mike is going to get into that more in a minute. But, therefore, we really think it's critical to bring as many voices into this conversation as possible so that we as a state can make an informed decision about the best path forward and really take into account your comments and feedback. In addition to this series of public listening sessions, we're also in the process of hiring a consultant to assist us with some of the technical and economic analysis of different policy options that could move Colorado toward cleaner trucks. No decisions have been made yet. We're gathering public feedback through these meetings. We're going to do some technical analysis, and we expect that that analysis is going to be completed spring, summer timeframe of 2021. And then, as I mentioned before, we have a website. We encourage you to keep in touch with the process by checking in on the website that we'll be updating throughout the process. Next slide. Trucks, they are undoubtedly a very important part of our economy as a state. This has become even more evident during the coronavirus pandemic, where our truckers have been working heroically really to keep our supply chains moving, to keep our grocery store shelves stocked, to deliver products that we need directly to our door in many cases, so that we don't have to leave our homes. CDOT has been working closely with our truckers for many years, and we're committed to continuing that relationship into the future. Many signs in the industry, however, are pointing to some very big changes in the truck technology. And again, this has the potential to dramatically improve the environmental impact of trucks, and it's something that we need to be considering. Next slide. As much as we love our truckers, again, we know that medium and heavy duty vehicles are a significant contributor to greenhouse gas emissions in the transportation sector. Trucks are only about 4.5% of the US vehicle fleet, but they account for 23% of the emissions in this sector. And we know that the air pollution from trucks is having a much greater impact on the health of our low-income communities and our communities of color who tend to live near these trucking corridors and distribution hubs. And that's something that we want to address as a state. How do truck emissions impact our air quality? Next slide, please, Keith. So one way that trucks impact our air quality is through the formation of ozone. Whenever we burn a fossil fuel, either in the engine of a vehicle, which comes out the tailpipe, or in an industrial process, which tends to come out of a smokestack, there are chemical compounds in that exhaust that include things like nitrogen oxides or NOx, volatile organic compounds or VOCs. And those things hang out in our air and essentially cook in the sunlight to form ozone. And ozone is that brown cloud that can be seen on the horizon more days than we would like, especially in our summer months here on the Front Range. Next slide. Ozone also has documented impacts on our health, especially the health of our lungs. And children who have a much higher respiratory rate than adults, meaning that they just breathe a lot faster than we do, take more of that pollution into their lungs. The elderly and people who work outside are also at greater risk. And breathing in ozone is linked to conditions like asthma, bronchitis, emphysema. In addition to those direct impacts on breathing, ozone also impacts other things like our ability to grow food and other things as well. So, you know, the state of Colorado does report to the US Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, on our air quality, and the Denver Metro North Front Range area is not in attainment with the air quality standards set forth by the EPA. In fact, we were downgraded from moderate to serious status for ozone last year. And unfortunately, with the incredibly hot and dry summer that we've had this year, we may be facing another downgrade from serious to severe in the near future. Next slide. So in addition to ozone formation, another impact of vehicle emissions is that these emissions are greenhouse gases, meaning that they contribute to climate change. Gases like NOx and methane and carbon dioxide, these are things that all occur naturally in our atmosphere, and they play an important role in keeping our planet warm because they absorb solar radiation from the sun. The problem is that when we put too many of these gases into the atmosphere, they absorb too much of that solar radiation such that the planet starts to warm. Colorado has already warmed 2 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 30 years and 2.5 degrees in the last 50. And future estimates are projecting that if we keep putting these greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, temperatures are going to rise an additional 2.5 to 5 degrees by the 2050 timeframe. And you know, that's like moving the weather that we typically see in Denver to a place like Estes Park, and you can kind of think about the impacts that that would have on our mountain communities. Next slide. Climate change is already impacting people now through things like increases in heat-related illnesses like heat stroke, increases in breathing issues. Warmer climates also mean that we don't get long, hard frosts that kill off insects. And we're seeing an increase in insect-borne illnesses as a result. And all of these factors obviously impact our mental health as well, and also our ability to grow food and access clean water. Next slide. People in Colorado specifically are seeing the impacts of climate change through things like reduced snowpack, warmer stream temperatures, things that impact not only some of the things that we as Coloradans enjoy, but also our tourism industry, which depends on those streams and snowpack for their livelihood. Drier soil is challenging for our farmers and the agricultural sector of our economy. The impacts of poor air quality, which I've mentioned already, harms our lungs and has pretty significant costs to our society for health. Everyone's watching the news and seeing the devastation of the forest fires in the state, including one fire that caused a really unprecedented 2-week closure of I-70, which is our main east-west thoroughfare and a huge contributor to our state economy. And finally, we're also seeing more intense and frequent floods. And unfortunately, there are some communities that are shouldering these burdens more than others. Next slide. As a state, we do know that people of color, tribes, and indigenous individuals, low-income communities, all of them are bearing more of these climate burdens. These are communities who've historically lacked access or even been intentionally excluded from the policy process. And many of these communities are again, bearing multiple environmental burdens at the same time. As a state, we are committed to building equity and justice principles into our response to climate change. And we're doing that through our climate equity framework. This process is being led by the climate unit at the Department of Public Health and Environment. And they are working to identify and really intentionally engage with these communities that are most impacted by climate change so that their voices are considered and included in our decision-making process and in our policies moving forward. And with that, I'll hand the podium over to Mike King, who's going to take us through the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Kay. Hi, everyone. This is Mike King with the Colorado Department of Transportation. I'm going to talk a little bit, Keith, if you could go to the next slide, please. So what types of vehicles are we talking about with this clean trucking strategy? As you can see, medium and heavy duty vehicles encompass a wide variety of vehicle types, duty cycles, and potential geographic locations across the state. So everything from class 3 on the left all the way up to class 8 at the bottom right. You can see a lot of specialization within that group. So it makes it a challenge to develop programs and policies and strategies that can effectively deal with all those different types of vehicles and types of fleets. That is, of course, one of the reasons why your input in this process is very important and why we'll be conducting data analysis to think about where are the opportunities and where are the greater challenges. Next slide, please. It's also important to briefly talk about what are zero emission vehicles. When we refer to zero emission vehicles, there's actually a variety of types that are under that umbrella. So most familiar to a lot of folks are the battery electric vehicles that use batteries that can be charged externally and they store recovered braking energy. BEVs basically use an electric motor as opposed to a traditional internal combustion engine. The second type on the list are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So these are a combination of an internal combustion engine and an electric motor, and they can switch back and forth or use both to maximize performance and energy. Plug-in hybrids, as the name implies, can also be charged on the grid, but they don't exclusively run on electricity. The third grouping are hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles. These are similar in that they have an electric powertrain. However, they produce that electricity by intaking hydrogen gas and creating electricity inside the vehicle, and the tailpipe emissions are replaced by water vapor. There are a couple different ways to produce that hydrogen, but that is one of the challenges, is building the fueling infrastructure to produce that hydrogen and also to do it in a low carbon way. And then finally, there are some other options such as renewable natural gas, other types of renewable fuels that can be zero emission, but it, like hydrogen, depends on the method of fuel production. Finally, there are some other non-powertrain elements such as hybrid refrigeration units on the back of semi-trucks that can be electrified even if the vehicle itself remains powered by an internal combustion engine. Keith, next slide, please. So Colorado's clean trucking strategy is meant to consider a wide variety of tools, strategies, and programs to address the different elements of the medium and heavy duty truck market and reduce the harmful pollution that we know is associated with transportation. Some of the elements can include getting older vehicles off the road, some of those older vehicles that are the highest polluters, getting them off the road sooner and cycling them out for newer, more efficient vehicles. Another element of that is providing incentives for cleaner trucks. A lot of the zero emission and cleaner vehicles that are available have a higher price point at this time. So bringing incentives to the table that can equalize that or even bring it under that of a traditional vehicle makes that transition much easier for fleets and others to handle. Similar to that is planning for the fueling needs of these zero emission trucks. So these could be electric charging for electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure from the utility that is needed for that. In the case of hydrogen or other alternative fuels, these could be fueling stations. And that's obviously an important element because without the fueling, you can't really do much with a vehicle. Some other elements, building partnerships with fleets for short and long-term planning. This effort, this webinar tonight is part of that to outreach to our fleet managers and as well as members of the community so that we can work together and figure out what is going to make the most sense for this transition in the state of Colorado. Also important is training new workers, new people to maintain and repair these technologies so that as a fleet owner or a fleet operator, you feel confident that if there is a problem with your vehicle, there are trained people locally that can address it as opposed to looking for somebody with expertise in a newer technology. And then finally, working with other states to explore possibilities together. We have signed a Memorandum of Understanding with 14 other states in the District of Columbia that will share information and collaborate on the planning elements so that we can make sure that multiple states across the country are sending a unified message to the industry and to the public, and that will make everyone's lives easier because we'll all be on the same page about where we're trying to go and how we're trying to get there. Keith, next slide, please. So part of that broader conversation, as I referenced, are some potential policy tools. Two of them that we wanted to highlight here. One is there are policies in other states that are under consideration by those 15 states and the District of Columbia that I mentioned to require a certain percentage of future sales of medium and heavy duty trucks to be zero emission vehicles. So this is a way to give the industry, the auto manufacturers, confidence that there is a market for these vehicles, and also nudge some of those fleets that have an opportunity to adopt a zero emission vehicle to do so a little sooner. The other element that is being looked at is setting higher standards for oxides of nitrogen or NOx in existing heavy duty engines. So for those fleets where going to a zero emission option is not yet feasible, cleaning up the NOx emissions of those more traditional vehicles so that we are getting the air quality benefit even if it's not truly zero emission. So these are the types of regulatory tools that we're going to be investigating as part of this process because we believe that they can help reduce the public health impacts of pollution, they can save lives, and they can save money over time through the avoided healthcare costs. Next slide, please. So as I've alluded to, there is a lot of variety within the medium and heavy duty truck space. And so most experts expect that we will see adoption of these types of vehicles in multiple waves. Rather than jumping to the most challenging use cases or duty cycles, we expect that the transition will occur in some of these phases. It is difficult to predict the exact timeline of these, but if you look at wave number one, we're already seeing quite a few transit agencies, both in Colorado and across the country and the world, that have adopted large numbers of battery electric buses, including RTD here in Denver, as well as in other states and countries, hydrogen fuel cell buses. And so that is already beginning to happen, and there are multiple manufacturers that are available to help those transit fleets begin that transition successfully. The second wave that many people expect and that we're starting to see in terms of pledges from companies like Amazon is the delivery space. These vehicles have some advantages in that they don't travel generally, they don't travel extremely long distances in a day, and their routing can be predictable and it can be adjusted based on the capabilities of the vehicle. So companies like Amazon have made public pledges to go zero emission. Others like FedEx and UPS have a long history of being early adopters of other alternative fuels and are beginning to replicate that process with zero emission vehicles now. Next, after that, we expect to see some of the medium freight and service vehicles, things like bucket trucks, potentially street sweepers, some of those specialty vehicles, refuse trucks that are starting to become feasible given their duty cycles and the advancement of the technology. And then further down the line, we expect that later on in the process, things like regional freight hauling and eventually corridor long haul freight will become more possible as the vehicles become available and as the necessary high-speed charging and potentially hydrogen fueling infrastructure is built out across the region and across the country. Next slide, Keith. So there are a number of studies. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in this topic, both in the private sector and in the public sector. And studies that have been evaluating the cost, the performance, and the model availability of zero emission trucks are showing that the price points are becoming closer and closer to gasoline and diesel vehicles. As I referenced already in the transit world, that price difference is becoming close enough that the operational savings gained by the fleet can make up for it in a short amount of time. So we are seeing that vehicles operating primarily in urban environments with predictable daily miles, centralized fueling or charging. Some examples of those would be municipal fleets, transit fleets, school bus fleets, refuse fleets, but not limited only to those municipal fleets. And small commercial shuttles, shuttle buses, and smaller delivery vans. These seem to be the ones that are closest to price parity. They're starting to make sense for a lot of fleets, and as a result, that's why we're seeing the adoption or the commitment to adopt in the near future. Those longer distance vehicles with heavier loads that travel longer distance, maybe have less predictable routing on a day-to-day basis, those are going to be more challenging, but we need to start thinking about that now so that when the vehicles are available, the infrastructure is in place and the policies and everything else, the incentives are aligned to support that rapid switch when it becomes a true option. So technology is improving very quickly, costs are coming down. These are the types of areas where well-targeted and well thought out public sector and utility incentives can make a real difference. Next slide, please. So we wanted to identify a few key questions that we would like you to think about, both in the context of making a public comment during today's meeting, or potentially sending us a written comment further on down the line. We're going to share an email address where that's an option for you. So some of these questions: how are you or your community affected by trucking? Another one to think about: what are the most important things, the most important considerations that the state of Colorado should keep in mind as we work towards this transition? Also, should the strategies and the actions taken in the future, should they be statewide in nature, or should they be targeted at either specific stakeholders, specific fleet types, or specific geographic areas? And then finally, what would a successful transition to cleaner trucking in Colorado look like from your perspective? These questions obviously are a little bit open-ended, but we hope that they'll spark some thoughts that you can either share as part of a public comment or in the chat box now, or that you can submit to us separately via the email that I'm going to show you, I think, on the next slide. Keith, can you go to the next one? Yes, so we're now going to transition into the public comment portion of the meeting. As a reminder, we're going to have 2 minutes available per speaker. I will be timing that, so apologies in advance if I need to chime in and ask you to wrap up your comment. We are going to try to prioritize elected officials and speakers that pre-registered in advance. So those of you that had the option to do that, will go down a list, and I will read the name of the next commenter as well as the next 2 that we expect after that, just so people are aware that they're coming up. And then if you haven't already, please check and make sure that the name identified for you in the Zoom is the same name that you used to register, so that we know where to find you so that we can unmute you. And written comments, as I mentioned, are welcome via the email address as well. So if you would prefer to do it that way, or in addition to your spoken comments, then that is an option. So with that, let me just do a quick check. I believe, so we are looking for a few commenters. I am going to start with Commissioner Karn Stiegelmeier from Summit County. And then after the commissioner, we will have JJ Trout from the City of Golden, and then Alana Langdon from Nikola Motors. And before I turn it over to Commissioner Stiegelmeier, I would also ask that if Troy Hill or Greg Fulton is on the line, that they please raise their hand now so that we can put them in the queue as well. So with that, Commissioner Stiegelmeier, can you go ahead and begin speaking?
Yes.
Yes.
I guess you can hear me.
I can hear you. Yes, please begin. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm County Commissioner for Summit County. And by the way, I love my electric car, and I'm an advocate for the electrification of the entire transportation sector. Summit County has a climate action plan that calls for lowering emissions from transportation 25% by 2030 and 90% by 2050. And reducing emissions from medium and heavy duty vehicles is a critical component for our community to meet our climate action goals. Transportation has a huge impact on our local and statewide greenhouse gas emissions and air quality. The importance of an ambitious and well-designed strategy for reducing carbon pollution associated with medium and heavy-duty vehicles can't be understated. Summit County has started our transition with the purchase of electric buses for our public transit system. We're really excited about those buses, and we hope to never buy another diesel bus again. As a major thoroughfare for interstate traffic, Summit County applauds CDOT and the Colorado Energy Office and other state partners for working to meet Colorado's carbon pollution goals. Our local governments can be valuable partners in these efforts, and we hope to continue to collaborate, and just thank you for your hard work. We support a wide-ranging strategy for reducing medium and heavy-duty vehicle emissions, including dramatically expanding EV infrastructure, adopting advanced clean truck standards, regional greenhouse gas budgets, and last-mile emission reductions, green procurement, and new demand management programs, and other approaches. Thank you very much for leading the way on this.
Thank you, Commissioner. Our next comment will be by JJ Trout from the City of Golden. After that, we will have Alana Langdon from Nikola Motors. And then I believe next up after that will be Shayna Oliver, who I believe is a member of the public. So Mr. Trout, or
Hi, I'm JJ Trout.
Excuse me. I realized it right after I said it. Excuse me.
There's a lot of JJs in sports and movies that are misters. That's totally
My apologies. Please go ahead.
Worries. Hi, my name is JJ Trout, and I am on Golden City Council, where we have a goal to achieve a 20% fossil fuel-free transportation sector by 2030 and 100% fossil fuel-free transportation sector by 2050. I also lead the Bicycle Industry's Sustainability Working Group, where we are a coalition of businesses working to reduce our own impact on climate change, including transportation of our goods, because there are a lot of businesses imperatives for doing our part for a clean planet. I want to weigh in here today because Golden and every other local community in Colorado is on the front lines of climate change. As atmospheric carbon increases and climate change worsens, we're facing an escalating risk of destructive flooding, growing vulnerability to drought, increased threat of wildfire, and the resulting impacts like excessive post-fire sediment loads in our water supply, a decline in our health and quality of life, and also economic impacts to our businesses. We have lots of folks in Golden and Colorado whose businesses are affected by the outdoors. We have manufacturers and retailers of outdoor gear, tour guides, outdoor race and events hosts, and all the hotels, restaurants, and breweries that they frequent. Clean outdoors means healthy businesses here in Colorado. Meeting the governor's bold climate ambitions and the emissions reduction targets established in statute by HB 1261 isn't going to be easy, but the stakes and urgency are too high to fail. This clean trucking strategy will be part of the solution, and we encourage you to bring an assertive, all hands and wide-ranging approach that considers all of the strategies that you have mentioned. Thank you for launching this effort, and know that local governments stand ready to partner with the state to help make this work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me pull up our next commenter will be Alana Langdon from Nikola Motors. Then we will go to Shayna Oliver. And then next after that will be Diego Lopez. So Alana,
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. And thank you. This is Alana Langdon. I'm Senior Manager of External Affairs and Public Policy for Nikola Corporation. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. Just want to take this opportunity to applaud the state of Colorado and the leadership from the Department of Transportation and Office of Energy on this endeavor. Nikola Corporation is globally transforming the transportation industry as a designer and manufacturer of zero-emission battery electric and hydrogen electric vehicles, electric drivetrains, components, and other systems and infrastructure. Nikola is driven to revolutionize the economic and environmental impact of commerce as we know it today. The company's three pillars include Nikola Motor Company, which is our on-road zero-emission vehicle division, Nikola Energy, which is working on the hydrogen infrastructure production and fueling distribution, and Nikola Power Sports, which is our off-road zero-emission vehicles. We are committed to a clean transportation future from energy creation to energy consumption. We are a strong believer that the future of zero-emission transportation is not a case of battery electric versus hydrogen electric, but rather battery electric and hydrogen electric. We are developing and working to create the ecosystems that will support both technologies. The launch of our first class BEV in North America will take place in late 2021. And these trucks will be initially manufactured in Europe by our partner Iveco until our US-based manufacturing facility in Coolidge, Arizona is complete in 2023, when our Class 8 FC EVs will be scheduled for launch. In the case of both these vehicles, Nikola's business model accounts for supplying both the truck and fueling infrastructure, which solves the fleet's concerns of where to refuel. We will plan to deploy up to 700 hydrogen fueling and charging stations across North America to support our freight customers, as well as for public fueling purposes. Thank you for putting the picture up. Our first customer will be Anheuser-Busch, is one of our first launch customers. And we have secured also about 2,500 electrified refuse trucks from Republic Services, which is expandable up to 5,000, and other customers are coming to us as well. So we look forward to continuing to work with the stakeholders in the state of Colorado. And if anyone is interested in learning more about Nikola, you can find us on our website at nikolamotor.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you very much for that comment. Our next comment will come from Shayna Oliver. And then next up after that, it appears Diego Lopez is not with us at the moment. Diego, if you are here, please raise your hand so we can spot you. But if not, after Shayna, we will have Paul Nelson. And then following Paul, we will have James Mora. So Shayna, please go ahead.
Hi, so my name is Shayna Oliver, and I am a field organizer with Moms Clean Air Force, as well as being an Indigenous people's rights advocate for the rights and access to clean air, water, and land. I think with Colorado having the worst air quality currently, I think we need to do all that we can do to help get lowered emissions from these highly polluted trucks, as well as our buses. As well as being low income, I understand like the systemic segregation of where we live. We tend to live near these traffic zones and where these trucking routes happen to be as well. So we're exposed to a lot of that ground ozone smog. So that increases our health compromises in our families, as well as myself, having asthma and having to stay indoors a lot. There's a lot of disadvantages of not cleaning up our air. So we, as Moms Clean Air Force, fully supports all initiatives of taking to reduce these greenhouse gases, such as ozone smog, which is contributed a lot by transportation as well as oil and gas development. And I just think, I just have like one question as well, because I know it's hard for rural areas to access like assistance for these type of initiatives or these type of transformations or updates with our transportation. How could you address that problem of getting assistance to like low income rural areas as well that struggle with being able to have access to cleaner trucks or as well as cars, and as well as the disadvantages that you have when you get a new car, such as the new electric car, how you're slapped with an exorbitant fee with your registration and stuff for having a new car, but it has like no benefits of like you don't have a reduced fee for having a less polluting vehicle. So I think that's like the disadvantages for low income people.
Thank you very much for that comment, Shayna. Your time has run up, but I will ask one of our panelists, once we transition from comments to the question period, I will ask one of our panelists to address your concern about assistance for lower income rural areas and the other issue that you raised. Continuing with our public comments, next on my list is Paul Nelson. And Paul, I apologize for the pronunciation. I believe that it's Sarad Enterprise Partners. And after Paul, we will have James Mora from X3CNG. And then following James, we have Kate Hagman from the Colorado Motor Carriers Association. So Paul, if you're ready, please begin your comment. Paul, I'm not hearing you. If you're trying to comment, you may need to unmute yourself.
Got it. Okay.
There you go. Please begin.
Excellent. Yep. Thanks for the opportunity. So Paul Nelson with Sarad Enterprise Partners. We're a Boulder-based VC firm. 3 of our investments are in this sector in Colorado. 3 Colorado companies. One is making electric battery materials better. It's a CU Boulder spin-out company. Another is delivering services for vehicle upfit in partnership with Ford Motor Company and other OEMs for natural gas vehicles. And the third is building fueling infrastructure for natural gas fueling in Colorado. Of course, those natural gas applications work just as well with renewable natural gas as they do traditional natural gas. I'd like to focus on 2 key elements. One is incentives. You spoke a little bit about that, and then requirements or mandates. For incentives, we're encouraging the state to consider a program that looks at dollars per ton reduced. So ranking different technologies and fuel types on a dollars per ton reduced, both from a GHG perspective and criteria pollutants like NOx emissions perspective. In addition, we would encourage the state to consider life cycle emissions, including the production of the vehicles and the infrastructure, and not just tailpipe emissions, which ignores mining of minerals and production of power that is separate from the tailpipe emissions. We would also encourage the use and inclusion in these requirements of renewable natural gas hydrogen, both blue and green hydrogen, as well as electric vehicles and hybrids among all three of these fuel types. And then for the requirements, we would like to encourage the same three fuel types to be used. And finally, we would ask that any obligations that are placed on fleets would also be obligations for the state fleet itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for that comment. Next up, we have James Mora from X3 CNG. After James, I believe we will have Troy Hill from the Colorado Motor Carriers Association. I believe you're on, Troy. And after Troy will come Kate Hagman, also from the Colorado Motor Carriers Association. So James, please unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hey, Mike, thank you for this. Good evening. Thank you for all for scheduling time and allowing for the public comments to be made on zero emission vehicles in Colorado. My name is James Moore, president of X3 CNG Colorado. X3 currently operates 7 compressed natural gas stations in Colorado. Our company supplies compressed natural gas, CNG, to a variety of fleets that include state agencies, school districts, municipal, and the private sector fleets. We're proud that all our customers that fuel at our stations utilize renewable natural gas, RNG. What's RNG? RNG is derived from raw biogas captured at landfills, wastewater facilities, and agriculture digesters, and it's processed into a high energy content fuel that is completely interchangeable with conventional natural gas. RNG production transforms discarded organic materials into productive fuel for transportation. Yes, the CDOT vehicles you see that run on CNG today run on methane captured from a variety of renewable sources like waste treatment plants, landfills, and agricultural waste. So we've already made a jump into this, and we want the state, and as part of this process, to think about renewable natural gas in terms of what's available today. From an investment perspective, RNG fuel trucks and transit buses, accessing cities and densely populated neighborhoods are the most immediate and fiscally responsible investment in to clean our air and combat climate change. Communities get more clean vehicles, having greater clean air and climate impact for the money with natural gas or renewable natural gas than any other alternative fuel option out today, especially electric. No other transportation fuel is sustainable, adaptive, and competitive across all applications and vehicle classes. And heavy-duty renewable natural gas trucks are not in demonstration science projects. They're proven, scalable, and on U.S. roads today. So, you know, as we go through the process here, in terms of looking at opportunities, looking at reducing and improving the air quality in the state, X3 is doing this. We have renewable natural gas available to our customers. We've got transit agencies up in Greeley who run on this, and many of the school districts as well. So I appreciate the time, appreciate more conversations. If anybody has any discussion on this, we're available on our sites to discuss renewable natural gas. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for that comment. We appreciate it. Next up, we have Troy Hill. And a correction to my previous statement, after Troy Hill, we actually have Greg Fulton who will be speaking. So Troy Hill from the Colorado Motor Carriers Association, then Greg Fulton also from the CMCA. Currently, we have no one else registered for comment after that. So if you would like to make a comment during the call today, please raise your hand or put a note in the chat now to let us know. And so with that, let's go to Troy Hill, please.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Troy.
Good evening. As Mike said, my name is Troy Hill. I'm the president and CEO of Hill Petroleum, a family-owned business based in Arvada. I'm also the chairman of the board for the Colorado Motor Carriers Association, which represents 650 companies directly involved or affiliated with trucking in Colorado. First, I'd like to express that I, along with my company and CMCA, are committed to improving the air quality and reducing our carbon footprint. We live in this state too, and we appreciate the importance of our environment. Let me also begin by commending the state for presenting a broad range of strategies rather than a single one-size-fits-all approach, and for engaging industry in helping to find the solutions. In our eyes, it's important that any state strategy be one that is multifaceted. There is no silver bullet in reducing emissions, including those generated by trucks. Our industry is not a monolith, but rather a diverse one with different types of operations, equipment, and technologies to meet the diverse needs of our customers and the nation. This strategy should include a variety of fuel types as well as different powered vehicles so as to address the unique needs and challenges posed by our industry. It's important that we match the most efficient and the most cost-effective approach for different fleets to achieve the greatest return on investment in regard to emissions reduction. All of the array of strategies, the most effective and efficient way to reduce emissions and cut greenhouse gases is the scrapping of older heavy-duty diesel trucks, 20% of which are responsible for 80% of the emissions. These vehicles generally are 2006 and earlier model trucks that may emit upwards of 60 times more emissions than newer models. More strict diesel emission standards went into place in 2010, with the result that 2010 and later year model trucks reduced particulate matter emissions to near zero, get a nitrous oxide emission even closer to near zero. Currently, 41% of the heavy-duty trucks in our state are 2010 or newer, as compared to 55% in Utah and a national average of 43%. If we can bring our overall inventory of heavy-duty trucks closer to that percentage of overall newer trucks in Utah, which is 55%, we can substantially cut overall emissions. Reaching a similar level as Utah is something that is very achievable if we provide incentives and encouragement to make that happen. Incentives, in this case, we believe is more readily adaptable than mandates. The challenge in Colorado is that most of these pre-2010 trucks are primarily owned by smaller companies. Many of these are disadvantaged business enterprises who cannot afford newer vehicles or in some cases adequately maintain the ones they have. Assisting these small companies to buy 2014 or newer used diesel trucks would dramatically reduce emissions while also improving safety. Providing
I apologize for cutting in. Your time is expired, but thank you for your comment, and please share any additional thoughts in the written format if you can. Thank you. Our next commenter will be Greg Fulton from the Colorado Motor Carriers Association. And we've also had one additional request to comment. So after Greg, we will have Erica Denny. So Greg, please go ahead with your comment. Greg, I'm not hearing you. You may have to unmute.
And did that work?
I think that is, I see Diego. Is that you, Diego?
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, it looked like it went on my screen. I'll mute myself now.
Yes, we'll go to Greg first. I see him unmuted now. After that, we'll do Erica, and then we will go back to Diego. Excuse me. Thank you. Go ahead, Greg, please.
First, let me, commend, CDOT CEO and the Department of Public Health and Environment for looking at a broad array of strategies. As Troy mentioned, there is no silver bullet out there. And especially if we want to get and meet air quality standards in the short period of time that we want. We are committed to this. We've been a EPA Smart Way partner since the beginning of the program. We've seen major reductions. Let me note that since 98% reduction in terms of NOx as well as PM10 on this. And we've also seen probably over the last several years a 25% reduction in terms of relating to applying those smart way principles in terms of vehicles, in terms of our carbon base, because we've moved from somewhere along, from something like a 5 or 6 to, something like 8 miles per gallon. I would note that the fact is that we look at each of these having a place in that puzzle, they're a piece. We need to understand we're not a monolith of an industry. Certain things like on the heavy duty side, we have electric vehicles coming as well as hydrogen, but it will take a while. In the meantime, we need to reduce our emissions now. And we realize we can do that, especially in those lower income areas where in many cases those older trucks that Troy mentioned are actually owned by those small companies are. I would not mention to you one other thing too here is, the first big step could be the state as well as the local governments. Many of these oldest, highest emitting trucks today are rolling on to, public works projects in those communities today. That's an effect actually, there are subcontractors, there's these little folks, by even encouraging or helping them to get a newer trucks, they would end up significantly reducing it. But we're encouraging, the state and local governments to step forward and take a lead in terms of doing this. They have the ability to actually help move that forward, and removing those trucks or helping to get to a point and assisting them to replace them. Like I said, we have a thing where a pre-1990 does 60 times the emissions actually than a new one does. Even getting them to a 2014 would reduce that by 50 or 55 times what it is today. So I would say let's focus on where some of those biggest problems are. Let's get those end of it there. Let's help set the path for ZEV, and we're working with it in terms of the future on this. But making sure we have the right fit at the right time is critical at this time. Once again, thank you for your time today, and I won't take any more time, but we appreciate the opportunity to comment, and also we remain committed to actually improving the environment here that we're for a state that we all love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fulton. We appreciate your comment. We have 2 more to go currently. So next up, we will have Erica Denny, and following Erica, we have Diego Lopez. So Erica, please begin your comment when you're ready.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Erica Denny. I work with our family-owned trucking company, Denny Transport, based in Commerce City. Our company is committed to improving the environment. We are a longtime partner in the EPA SmartWay program and have implemented a wide range of strategies to reduce emissions, including the purchase of new extremely clean diesel trucks, idle reduction technologies, low rolling resistance tires, trailer skirts, and more. In addition, we have acquired standby electric trailers and have retrofitted our facility with an additional transformer so that the diesel motor can be deferred to electric while plugged in. These efforts have dramatically reduced our emissions and greenhouse gas footprint by reducing our fuel consumption by over 45%. We recognize that the zero emission vehicle is important and of great interest, and we share that. We would, however, caution that this technology appears to still be evolving and is not fully ready for substantial deployment. As example, based on our interest in EVs, we have already ordered a Class 8 Tesla truck some time ago. We paid the full amount of over $200,000 for it up front to be part of what they call the Founders Edition, which in essence means we'll get one of the first ones off the line. As of right now, we have yet to receive it, nor have we even been given a firm delivery date for them. While yes, we've ordered this truck, but we're still very concerned as to the electric power it's going to require to charge it. Various experts have indicated that one Tesla truck will require a megawatt of power to charge it fully. That's the equivalent of powering 350 homes. We currently cannot accommodate for that power needed for one of those trucks, no less a fleet of our size of over 100, without substantial enhancement of the electrical grid in our area and major retrofitting of our facility. Not to mention a completely new type of technician, which will be an additional challenge. I caution that while zero emission vehicles are coming in the medium and heavy duty area, there's no doubt about it, they're not fully here yet. These technologies must still evolve, and we must still have a robust infrastructure across the nation to be in place for a fleet like ours who travels coast to coast. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for that comment, Erica. And our last commenter for the evening, unless someone else puts up a hand, will be Diego Lopez from the Northern Colorado Clean Cities Coalition. Diego, if you could unmute and begin your comment, please.
Excellent. Thank you so much for the opportunity and really listening in to the equity portion of all of us. And just to echo pretty much what everybody is saying, heavy duty vehicles, the heavy duty industry is very different than consumer vehicles. Their needs are different. Their sustainability solutions are different. So life cycle analysis should absolutely be key here to see, do they meet the needs, the routes, and then the sustainability goals. And then I also, of course, want to, again, just echo some of the things that other people have said, was that this technology, RNG, and we're going to run the gamut. We're fuel neutral. All of these types of fuels work for our fleets. And so we are supportive of a fuel neutral and sustainable approach. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diego, for that comment. I see one more request for, I believe it, Mark Devincenti. However, I do not see Mark listed. If Mark could put their hand up, or if somebody could let us know which phone number Mark is under, we would be happy to let them speak. While we're looking for that, I will also do another call for, earlier we were looking for Shelley Kaup of Glenwood Springs. If Shelley is here, please give us an indication. And I believe Chris Kielty was also registered for a comment, if Chris is here, or Franz Westenbrink was registered for a comment. If any of those folks are here, please let us know. And if you're not able to let us know, then there will be a third meeting opportunity to provide comment, as well as the email address that you see on your screen. So if you're trying to speak up and we're not seeing you, we apologize. I think at this point, seeing no other comments, okay, I think that we are going to move on to some of the questions that were submitted, both during the conversation today as well as before the webinar. So the first question, one that was mentioned earlier in the discussion tonight, was from Shayna Oliver. And just as a reminder, that question was around how poor and rural communities are able to access cleaner trucks and vehicles, and also the question of fees on zero emission vehicles and how those can be overcome. So I believe we're going to put this question to John Putnam from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to answer. John?
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mr. King, and thank you particularly, Ms. Oliver, for those excellent questions. I think ensuring that all Coloradans have access to this new technology is a critical part of equity and environmental justice. And so looking to rural areas and lower income communities, I'll start first quickly with cars or light duty vehicles and then move on to trucks. For light duty purposes, I think a key part of this is breaking down some of the barriers that people have in accessing this technology, and they come in different forms. The first is you need to have access to charging infrastructure. And so the Colorado Energy Office has been investing in chargers throughout the state, including high-speed DC fast charging infrastructure on corridors around the state, as well as other chargers that aren't quite as quick, but can be spread more rapidly. And also have been working with some of the utilities, Tri-State as an example, with some of the rural co-ops, has made it a commitment to put chargers in all of the rural co-ops around the state. Others have been installing those. So that's part of that element. And we're interested in getting comment as part of not just this process on trucks, but more generally to see other ways that we can break down those barriers. Secondly, we know that there's often difficulty charging at home for some people if people are tenants. If people are part of multifamily units, it's harder to just go in and stick in a charger. So we've been working through both financing opportunities and then with the utilities. So Xcel Energy, for example, has a proposal that's pending right now that would install a number of units at multifamily homes and break down some of the barriers to allow charging in those homes. And then third, we know that cost is an issue. So want to work with stakeholders to figure out ways that we can reduce the cost enhance access to credit, enhance access to used EVs, knowing that some people can't afford a full brand new EV. I think there are a lot of different ways that we can enhance access to that, not just for higher income individuals or people in the urbanized Front Range, but really throughout the state. So we're very interested in those. If you've got further ideas, we're interested in hearing more about that. For trucks in particular, I think there's a few different issues. One, they still need the access to charging, just like the light duty vehicles. And so working on expanding high capacity charging throughout the state is important. There was discussion this evening about the possibility of renewable natural gas as an option. That's something we're also interested in taking a look at, and some of the agricultural waste or livestock waste or other sort of things that may be present in some rural parts of the state can provide feedstock to create some of that renewable natural gas. So we think there are some opportunities that could exist for that technology. And then working with the rural co-ops and other utilities to really provide incentives, break down barriers, and look where the state can help fill in some of those gaps. As a couple of the speakers have mentioned, from a just purely cost and infrastructure perspective, it probably makes sense to start in some of the densely urbanized areas where there's a lot of freight industry and logistics industry, where I think we'll get the most immediate impact from a clean air perspective, from a health perspective, from a health equity perspective. And those are in places like Commerce City, in North Denver, some other communities like that. But eventually we do want, and I think as a state, need to spread this to the rest of the state and ensure that we've got equitable access to this technology. So thank you again.
Thank you for that answer, John. And as John emphasized, please, any additional thoughts or comments that you have on that or other topics, please email to the address here on the screen, cleantruckstrategy@state.co.us.
Actually, Mike?
Yes.
Really quickly, I realize I didn't address Ms. Oliver's question about the EV fees.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
There is currently an EV fee that's assigned to each vehicle. I paid it for my vehicle. That's intended to provide a fair share contribution to the fact that EVs use the roads and aren't paying gas taxes, which otherwise are used to pay for those roads. Because that's part of the overall package of cost that every person, certainly a lower income person, would have to pay. It is one of those things that I think we'd want to look at how we equitably can look at those issues, knowing that if a lower income person is moving from a gasoline powered vehicle, they're probably paying a higher amount in gasoline taxes right now. But also knowing that sometimes adding a lot of upfront costs is just not affordable. That's one of the things that I think we'd be interested in working through.
Thank you for adding that, John. Our next question is one that we're going to direct to Will Torr from the Colorado Energy Office. And this question comes from Joshua Morin. And Joshua submitted this in advance and then I think added a little bit extra in the chat. So the question is, what would you advise to a startup business that looks at buying used diesel trucks as the cheapest option to build a fleet? I am a small tree care business owner, curious about how to address access to electric or non-polluting vehicles. Currently, the cheapest option is for a small business to buy a used truck coming out of California. And then we drive these trucks into local communities where they pollute. So what opportunities exist for somebody like Joshua that wants to have access to those vehicles? So Will, can you address that, please?
Yeah, happy to. Again, this is Will Torr, the Director of the Energy Office. And I'd say, I think we recognize that the vast majority of trucking companies are small businesses. I think that about 90% of trucking companies in Colorado have less than 5 trucks in their fleet. And that buying used trucks is a very common practice, especially for those small businesses. I think we also sort of agree with the statements that have been made that the oldest diesel trucks are the most polluting and pose the greatest threats to our air quality. I think, as was described by a number of speakers, older diesel vehicles have much higher emissions of both particulates and nitrogen oxides. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, the difference is not as large. It's more incremental, but when it comes to those criteria pollutants, it's really a stark difference. And so fleet turnover does need to be a part of our strategy. So one piece of this is getting to a point where more of the diesel trucks that are on the road meet at least the 2014 emission standards. But then we also want to see more zero emission vehicles and medium and heavy duty fleets. Certainly, growing share over time as more and more classes of vehicles reach cost and performance parity. Right now, it's certainly the case that the initial purchase price of zero emission vehicles is higher than diesel. That won't always be the case, but will be for a while. However, total cost of ownership looks better than the initial purchase price, since the vehicles are more efficient, less fuels required, fuel costs less, and we would anticipate much lower maintenance costs for electric vehicles also because there are so many fewer moving parts. So, one of the things that I think is an important policy issue for the state to address as part of this strategy is looking for ways to help to incentivize adoption of zero emission vehicles by small businesses in addition to the larger fleets, looking at both how we can bring down the initial cost, to what extent there may be opportunities to create new financing models, such as battery leases or other models that would transform some of that higher initial cost into an ongoing operating cost that is made up for by the lower fuel costs. Right now, we do have some programs in place. So the Alternative Fuels Colorado program, administered through the Regional Air Quality Council, has funding coming from the Volkswagen emissions cheating settlement. It is available for zero emission trucks and buses, and that is one place that you can go today to apply for funding. In addition, there are tax credits for the purchase of new zero emission trucks. So there are a couple of things that are in place today that would encourage you to take a look at. But certainly that's an area that I think we really need to explore through the development of this strategy.
Thank you, Will, for that answer. Moving right along so we can cover all the questions we received. Our next question, we're going to turn to John again to address this. This is a question from Julie McCaleb, and she says, will this affect those of us in Eastern Colorado that are trying to haul grain or livestock? So John, can you speak to that, please?
I can, thank you. And thanks, Ms. McCaleb, for that question. So the answer is, I think it is already affecting folks in Eastern Colorado and the agricultural community insofar as I think the technology is moving towards tools that can provide a better life cycle business case for small businesses, larger businesses that are involved in agricultural production or support. That being said, I think one of the things that we're looking for is to get feedback from stakeholders about how that works, knowing that urban areas and rural areas are not the same in terms of access to infrastructure, the duty cycles, the lengths of trips, the roads that you travel on. All of those sorts of issues, I think, differ, as well as the air quality benefits are stronger most immediately in the Front Range, where we know we've got ozone non-attainment issues. We've got large concentration of disadvantaged communities living near freight corridors. So I think we're probably going to want to focus some of our initial efforts in those areas. But as we look out over time, we'll probably both need, but also want to make the benefits of this technology available across the state in an equitable way.
Thank you, John. Our next question comes from Lisa Streisfeld, and this question will be directed to Shoshana Liu, the Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Transportation. The question is, Will truck parking and chain-up areas have electric vehicle charging infrastructure installed to support the shift to EVs? Shoshana, can you speak to that, please?
Sure. So I think it is both a good question and thank you, Lisa. As we think about the CDOT planning process, a good flag for where we need to start to think differently about kind of meshing up the work that we do on the traditional infrastructure side and the work that we do on the charging infrastructure side, right? Because for those who are not familiar with what we're talking about, the truck parking and chain up areas are largely within the state's right of way because they're the places on our highway system that are kind of allocated for the functions that trucks and particularly long haul need to move across our system. So as we think about where trucks would stop, this has to be a part of the conversation. I would say that the plans are not there right now, but this is exactly the kind of thing that we're trying to sort of stitch together with this process. Whether it's chain-up stations and parking areas, or the major interstate corridors where the large fleets sort of reside. I think about the junction of 70 and 270 as a place where a lot of our fleet activity concentrates in the state. So thinking about how you would wire the future infrastructure in places that are kind of concurrent with where trucks need to be able to conduct commerce and comply with hours of service requirements and other such things is exactly the kind of question we are trying to ask, and exactly why we need to think about these things as different pieces of the same puzzle, and in a way where we sort of plan for them together. So thanks for the question, Lisa, and thank you for sort of bringing that connection point into the conversation.
Thank you, Shoshana, for that answer. Our next question comes from Paul Nelson, and actually a similar question also came from Chris Kilty. I will direct this to Will Torr. And so the question summarized between the two of them was about, will renewable natural gas and hydrogen hybrids, RNG and electric hybrids, etc., will they be considered as part of zero emission or zero emission vehicle qualifications? Will, can you please address that?
Yeah, happy to. So, first I would say that currently the funding that the state has available for supporting zero emission trucks and buses through the Alternative Fuel Colorado program and through the CDOT allocations through their consolidated call for proposals for transit buses, using funding that came from the Volkswagen emissions settlement, is available for both electric, hydrogen, and renewable natural gas vehicles. In addition, the statewide greenhouse gas roadmap that our agency has been leading the development of, but working with 4 other state agencies, including CDOT and CDPHE, has identified that reducing emissions of methane from landfills, sewage treatment plants, and other sources is going to be a very important step to meeting, the 2025 and 2030 greenhouse gas targets. And I think we'll be looking at a number of potential legislative and regulatory approaches to encourage capture and reuse of this methane, which should make more locally sourced RNG available for transportation uses. I would say that, as folks know, part of this process will be evaluating whether to adopt the Advanced Clean Truck Standard. And as we look at that, we are bound by the identicality requirements set by the Clean Air Act. So on the regulatory side, if the state were to decide to move forward on the advanced clean truck side, I believe that would be focused on hydrogen and electric vehicles.
Thank you, Will. Our next question, moving along, will be to John Putnam again. And this question is from Thomas Moran at TJ Enterprises. Thomas says, currently there are only 400 horsepower RNG over-the-road truck engines available. So would the state permit funding for an EPA-compliant high horsepower diesel engine? John, can you speak to that question?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. King, and thank you, Mr. Moran, for that question. So I think those are the sort of questions and issues that we want to get feedback on. now as part of this process to figure out how to structure programs to achieve both short and long-term fleet modernization and environmental goals. We heard from Mr. Hill and Mr. Fulton tonight talking about some of the benefits of swapping out older diesel trucks for newer Tier 4 and other compliant vehicles. So an approach like this may make sense as a kind of initial measure. Over time, I think we're likely to see more cleaner options in, and I think we're probably going to want to incentivize the cleanest options moving forward. So, I think we're interested in your feedback and everybody else's feedback about the best way to stage public funds to be able to, achieve the most bang for the buck in terms of reducing emissions, improving conditions in some of those areas affected by air pollution, and then meeting our climate goals over time. I don't think there's necessarily a one-size-fits-all way of doing that.
Thank you, John. Moving along, our next question. This is aimed at Shoshana again, and the question is: what technology advances do you think are possible in the near future that can help us in this process? Shoshana?
It's a good question, and I think in some ways we can guess, and in some ways we don't yet know what we don't know, right? I think one of the things that's really exciting about the advancements we've seen in the last year is how exponentially some things have sort of gone from being niche to being part of the mainstream. Like, you look at the improvements we're seeing in the power sector that Will and John and others have done so much work on, and it's gone from being something that seemed like a long way away to being something where we can suddenly see the majority clean power being within plain sight. So I think with vehicle technology too, all of us kind of expect that the curve is going to be exponential, not linear. With that said, there are certain areas of the trucking sector that are farther ahead than others, and in a lot of ways, it has to do with similarity to the vehicle base of a smaller car, right? I mean, the lighter duty side of medium and heavy duty is kind of similar parts to big cars. The difference between what's classified under the regulations as a light truck versus what's classified as the low end of a medium truck, which is big vans, big pickups. They're very similar technology pathways with similar parts. They tend to be made by similar manufacturers. So, it's easier to envision those kind of moving fast at the same rate as their sort of sibling vehicles that are a little bit smaller but made on a lot of the same base. So, you have companies like Ford that are making an electric F-150. They can expand that technology to something that's in the medium duty sector as well. A number of other companies are kind of in a similar space. So, I think that's a long way of saying and explaining why the smaller part of the truck fleet is moving faster from a technology standpoint than the really big ones, which, have a lot of very different components, different use cases, there are different safety configurations, and just a lot more variety even between two products that are made by the same manufacturer than the things that are sort of mass marketed at greater magnitude, which tend to have a lot more sort of parts that can be intermingled.
Thank you very much for that, Shoshana. Our next question is related to, and this is for John Putnam again. How is the state moving forward with the implementation of House Bill 1261? And maybe, John, a quick refresher of what's in that bill, just so that folks are all on the same page. So, John, can you please address that?
Thank you, and it's a great question and a great reminder for that refresher. So, as a refresher, this was the legislature's direction, and the governor signed this bill in 2019 to create targets for greenhouse gas reductions in the state. So those reduction targets are 26% by 2025, 50% by 2030, and 90% by 2050, all from a 2005 baseline. Given that transportation is now the largest greenhouse gas contributor in the state of Colorado, and that medium and heavy duty vehicles account for more than a quarter of the transportation sector emissions, will not be able to meet those House Bill 19-1261 targets without addressing the types of fleets and vehicles covered in the clean trucking strategy. So we're undertaking this collaborative process as one element in a broader greenhouse gas reduction roadmap that's designed to make the goals of House Bill 1261 a reality. So that's what we're doing here. That roadmap will be available in draft form in a couple of weeks by the end of this month. We're interested in everybody's input on that, and we'll be holding additional public comment sessions on that, and the Air Quality Control Commission will be considering that at their October meeting, so we're interested in doing that. But that roadmap really sets out a set of investment strategies like we're talking about here, regulatory strategies that would happen at the Air Quality Control Commission, Public Utilities Commission, that may include legislative approaches. And so really it will involve a number of tools to get to that. One of those pieces will be reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the trucking sector.
Thank you so much, John, for that, and for that really great explanation of how these things all sort of fit together. We have two more questions in our queue right now. Before I read those, I'll just extend the invitation to our participants. If you have additional questions, please put them in the chat now so that we can get those lined up and answer them before the end of the meeting. Our second to last question right now is actually directed again at Will Torr. And this question is whether Colorado, as part of this effort, excuse me, this is from Zachary Kahn, submitted this question. As part of the clean trucking effort, is Colorado also looking to reduce the carbon intensity of transportation fuels through something like a clean fuel standard or an LCFS, as is in place in California and Oregon? Zachary says that LCFS is a market-based solution that reduces GHG emissions from transportation fuels. So Will, could you please address that question from Zachary?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the Energy Office actually contracted with a consultant over the last year to do an initial feasibility study on a clean fuel standard for the state of Colorado. As Zachary described, the LCFS is a market-based solution in which essentially the state would set carbon intensity reduction targets for liquid transportation fuels that would decline over time. And there would be a sort of trading and crediting mechanism that would allow refineries and wholesalers of fuel to both directly reduce the carbon intensity of their fuel or purchase credits from other entities, such as producers of biofuels or entities that are providing electricity for electric vehicles. And the study will be releasing in the relatively near future. We are pretty close to a final feasibility study. And I think that the conclusion is that while this would be feasible and could lead to reductions in carbon intensity, that it's pretty complex to set up such a system. And there's also, I think, some open questions that we haven't really answered yet. You know, the state's primary focus on moving towards low emissions transportation has been moving towards zero emission vehicles such as electric and hydrogen vehicles, and an openness on renewable natural gas. We really have not done a full analysis or stakeholder process around the role, particularly of conventional biofuels in decarbonization. And one of the things that became clear through the feasibility study is that at least in the first decade of a clean fuel standard, much of the investment would go into supporting conventional biofuels, including conventional biofuels produced outside of Colorado and imported into the state. And so I think until we're able to do an additional analysis on that and stakeholder engagement, we're probably not recommending it as a near-term action item in 2021, but rather as a potential future strategy to continue evaluating.
Thank you, Will. And actually, our final question is also for Will Torr. So I will turn this back to him in a second. This question is from Greg Fulton with the Colorado Motor Carriers Association. And I think along similar lines, you know, to some of our previous conversations tonight, is the state open to incentivizing the development of renewable natural gas production facilities? We've talked about RNG and other alternative fuels. Is that part of the potential future equation? Will?
So it certainly, I think, is a potential option. On a small scale, this has actually taken place already. I believe that the RNG development associated with the sewage treatment plants of both Grand Junction and I believe Longmont, I believe that both of those had grant funding support from the Department of Local Affairs through energy impact grants. But on a larger scale, as we look at the opportunities to reduce methane emissions from landfills, sewage treatment plants, and other sources, I think there's a lot of interest in exploring some mechanisms that could create financial incentives and investment by other private sector entities to support the creation of RNG production that would reduce methane emissions into the atmosphere.
Thank you, Will. So I'm seeing that we may have at least one more question. So let me just quickly read this. This will be directed to Shoshana. And the question is from Craig Hurst. How is CDOT modifying planning and engineering and design and regulation for the anticipated additional vehicle weights that electric and hybrid vehicles may have? Shoshana, could you speak to that point?
Good question, Craig. To say the CDOT team very present on the questions here tonight. Thank you, guys. I think that there's it's a cue to a longer conversation that I think Greg Fulton would say very much needs to happen about how we sort of think about the modern application of truck size and weight conversations. Lots of different views on this, but I think probably there's widespread agreement that they haven't been looked at fresh in a while, and it's sort of overdue to have that conversation. Both for bigger and for smaller, depending on the applications of trucks. In terms of what freight looks like today and what the sort of optimized size for different freight applications looks like. My hypothesis, just sort of going off the cuff, is that there's some places where you might see benefits to larger vehicles for different reasons. There's some places where shrinking the size of shorter hauls might make sense. So I think that those conversations need to all be had together to sort of think about what are the business use cases for different kinds of vehicles and different sort of parts of the freight sector. How do they fit together? Where are you sort of optimizing for the best product with the best application? And at that also just thinking about what it does to the infrastructure itself over time, right? I mean, one of the challenges with bigger trucks is that they break the roads faster. That doesn't mean that there aren't benefits to looking at it, but there's a cost and a benefit every time you have that discussion. So, I think sort of taking all those pieces together and, thinking about what's the cumulative impact for how many trucks at different sizes and weight, makes a lot of sense. I know that CMCA very much wants Congress to look at some changes in that space. And I think we've said that we're open to having that conversation. The state is sort of constrained in what we can look at with federal restrictions in place. So there's multiple levels of government that need to be involved in that conversation.
Thank you, Shoshana. And John, did you have an additional comment on that point?
And this is John. I think it was a slightly different point. I think we also had a question that I didn't hit fully before, and that related to access for buses and transit vehicles as well. I talked about trucks and low emission vehicles for lower income communities. But also wanted to flag that transit vehicles and other public vehicles covered and using diesel are part of this strategy. As part of the Volkswagen settlement, we did fund a number of diesel-powered vehicle buses across the state in both urban and rural areas. And I think we're going to be interested in looking ahead to how to do that as well. And I think to Mr. Fulton's point, we do want to take a look at public works, state and local government. The state has a commitment, and we're increasing the number of vehicles that we have. A number of local governments have done the same. And, I think, we heard from Commissioner Stiegelmeyer and Councilperson Trout, a number of local governments are doing that. And I think everybody, should be in on it.
Thank you, John, for that. And I also want to acknowledge that we also had a similar question from Greg Fulton related to the weight limits, and I believe that Shoshana has addressed that. But Greg, of course, if you have further comments, please feel free to share those with us after the meeting. At this point, we have no more questions or comments submitted, so I will ask Keith if you can go to the last slide of the presentation. So, first of all, thank you everyone that participated tonight. I think it was a really interesting amount of feedback, great perspectives, and really good questions. So hopefully you found this valuable as well. This is not the end of the conversation. We want to continue this in our third public meeting, which is scheduled for October 1st. That will be from 2 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And in addition to that, of course, we have our Clean Trucking Strategy webpage there, which you can see many of you have probably visited that as part of your registration for this event. And we also have the availability of that email for additional comments that you would like to share with us. Over the course of the night, we've also referenced a number of other upcoming efforts and activities, and we always welcome public involvement in those projects for the future. So with that, we appreciate your time and your input. We apologize for some of the technical difficulties that we experienced tonight, and we're going to work to improve those in the future. And let's continue the conversation. So unless there are any other comments, I'll thank everyone, thank the panelists, and we'll wrap up for the night. Have a good evening, everyone.